What's up, creatives? I wanted to come to you guys today and teach you guys a little bit about frame rates. So for beginners, a lot of people tend to use just any old frame rate. They really don't understand frame rates, and basically what I want to do is break that down to you. So you have 24 frames per second. This is shooting 24 shots in 1 second. 24 frames per second is considered a cinematic look. This is what you want to shoot your performance shots on with all music videos. Anything else besides 24 is not going to give you that cinematic look. 29 frames per second, 60 frames per second, all of those frames per second are going to give you like a kind of like slow, like weird look. The only exception is if you want to slow down your clip in the middle of a performance. If this is the case, then you want to shoot at a higher frame rate in variables of 24. So 24 times 2 is 48. 24 times 3 is 72. The higher you go, the slower you can slow it down in post. So let's say we want to slow the clip down. So most DSLRs have 60 frames per second, so this is what we're going to do. Say you want to slow your clip down in the middle of a performance, so you would shoot the whole performance at 60 frames per second. 24 times 2.5 would be 60. So when you shoot your 60 frames per second and you bring it into post, you want to multiply it by 2.5, which will go to 24 frames per second. It'll give you a 24 frames per second clip in your timeline. So you line it up, let it go through and stream through, and whenever you want to slow it down, you cut it, you change the speed back to 100%, which would equal 60 frames per second, and it would be smooth slow motion. So that kind of breaks it down for 24 frames per second and so on. Now for most B-roll and slow motion, you just want to shoot anything higher than 48 frames per second. Sometimes you might want a little slow motion, sometimes you might want it super slow-mo. Now the higher your frame rate is, the slower your clip is going to be. So most people like to use 120 frames per second just because even if you get a little shake when you're shooting, it's so slow that you can't really see the shakes. Now not all cameras have 120 frames per second. Typically DSLRs have 60 frames per second at the highest frame rate you can go. But nowadays they're making them where they're a little bit higher. GH4 and GH5 have variable frame rates. They can go 48, 72, 96, 120, 180. Canon, you can do 120 frames per second on the 5D Mark IV, but it's only in 720p, so you're not really wanting to use that often. The 1DX Mark II now has the 120 frames per second at 1080, so that's pretty fire. So I know this is a quick, simple video. I just wanted to basically explain frame rates to you guys. You want to use 24 frames per second for cinematic performance shots, nothing else, unless you want to slow your clip down in the middle of the shot. You want to shoot at a higher frame rate, but in a variable of 24. Make sure that you can multiply 24 to get that number that you shoot in. So 24, 48, 72, 96, 120. Those are all variables of 24 frames per second. And then anything slow motion, you want to shoot 48 frames per second and higher. Typically, I like 72, 96, and 120 frames per second for slow motion. And when I don't have that, I just use 60. Now, if you're using a GH4, GH5, and some other cameras, they will do your slow motion in camera. So when you bring it into your editing program, it'll already be slow motion for you. But other cameras like Canon DSLRs, like this camera right here, my Canon 6D Mark II, you have to conform the clip to make it into a slow motion. So I'll show you right here how I do that. So I actually don't have any 60 frames per second clips in this project, so I'm just going to show you right here. Say this was a 60 frame per second clip. So you want to right click on it, and you want to come to modify, and you want to come to interpret footage. Sorry about that. All right, right here, assume this frame rate, and you want to go type in 23.976, or you can type in just 24 frames per second, and it'll conform it back from 60 frames per second to 24 frames per second. And when it does that, it makes it slow motion. It makes it eligible to be put into a 24 frames per second timeline. So that's how you conform your clips when you're using like a Canon or cameras that don't actually give you slow-mo directly out of the camera. I hope this video kind of helped you a little bit understand the breakdown of frame rates and how they work with music videos. If you like this video, slap the like button, man. Share this video for other creators to see, and comment below and let me know what else you'd like to see from me, man. Peace.